lonely rancher thought no one wanted her until she whispered, "Can you pretend to be my husband?" Clara Jensen had always known life would be different for her. Born and raised on a ranch in the wide open plains of Montana, she had learned early on that the world could be harsh and unforgiving. The ranch had been in her family for generations, and while many of her friends left town to chase careers, adventures, or the bright lights of the city, Clara stayed. She loved the quiet rhythm of the land, the way the sun rose over the horizon in a blaze of gold and orange, and the feeling of soil under her hands when she worked the fields. But that same quiet, which she cherished during the day, became heavy and lonely at night. From the moment she could walk, Clara had been helping on the ranch. She fed the animals, learned how to mend fences, and even learned how to ride a horse with a sure, steady hand. Her father often said she had a natural way with the land, a gift that few could match. Yet for all her skills, Clara was different from the other girls in town. While her classmates talked about dresses, parties, and boys, Clara's world revolved around livestock, tractors, and sun-bleached barns. People admired her work ethic, but many assumed that someone so dedicated to the ranch couldn't be interested in the usual social things. Over time, that assumption became reality. By the time she was in her mid-20s, Clara realized she had never had a serious relationship, and she began to wonder if anyone would ever see her as more than just the hard-working rancher girl. The ranch itself was a large, sprawling property, dotted with barns, corrals, and pastures stretching as far as the eye could see. Clara's father had passed away a few years earlier, leaving her the sole caretaker of the land. The responsibility was immense, and some days it felt heavier than she could bear. She woke before sunrise to feed the animals, tended to the fields, repaired broken fences, and managed every aspect of the ranch without help. On the surface, her life appeared full, productive, and meaningful. But underneath that there was a quiet ache. She longed for someone to share her successes, someone to sit with her on the porch after a long day and simply talk, laugh, or share a moment of quiet. She had friends in town, of course, but none could truly understand the depth of her connection to the ranch or the solitude that came with it. Clara often walked along the edges of her property in the evenings, letting the warm, fading light wash over her. The mountains in the distance cast long shadows, and the wind carried the faint scent of hay and soil. She would sit on an old wooden fence, watching the cattle graze, and feel a mix of pride and loneliness. Pride because she had kept the ranch alive and thriving on her own. Loneliness because there was no one to celebrate it with. She had friends who would visit from time to time, but most of them led busy lives, and their visits were short. Clara knew she couldn't blame them. She had chosen this life after all, but the ache in her chest never fully went away. She remembered the first time she felt the sting of isolation in a personal way. It was during a town festival when she was 16. While other girls her age danced and laughed with friends, Clara had wandered to the outskirts, feeling out of place. She had wanted to join the fun, but something always held her back. The fear of not fitting in, the fear of being misunderstood. That fear had followed her into adulthood, growing stronger with every passing year. People admired her independence, but admiration didn't fill the space where companionship should have been. Still, Clara did not complain. She had work to do, animals to care for, and land to maintain. Each day brought new challenges: a sick cow, a broken fence, an unexpected storm, and these tasks kept her busy. She found solace in routines, and there was a quiet satisfaction in solving problems on her own. The ranch demanded her full attention, and in return it gave her a sense of purpose. She had friends who would often ask, "Don't you ever get tired of being alone?" She would smile and shrug, replying simply, "I like my life." And she meant it, at least on the surface. Yet the nights told a different story. After the animals were fed and the barns locked, Clara would often sit in the dim light of her kitchen, sipping tea and listening to the wind sweep across the plains. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the wooden floors. On nights like that, the silence felt almost tangible, pressing against her like a heavy blanket. She would glance at the empty chairs, the unused dishes, and the quiet living room, wishing for a presence she had never truly known. It wasn't that she hated being alone. She loved independence. But there were moments when the emptiness became almost unbearable. Despite her solitude, Clara had a spark inside her that refused to be extinguished. She loved the land too much, the animals too deeply, and the life she had built too fiercely to ever give up. She found joy in small victories. A calf that survived a difficult birth, a field that finally bore a healthy crop, a fence she had repaired perfectly. These moments reminded her that she was strong, capable, and resilient. She was proud of herself, even if no one else ever would be. Clara also had a gentle sense of humor, though few saw it. When she spoke to the animals, she often joked aloud, imagining conversations with the cows, horses, and chickens. Sometimes she would laugh at the absurdity of it all, feeling a connection to the creatures around her that she didn't have with humans. They were constant companions, loyal in their own way, and they didn't judge her for her solitude or her quirks. As she grew older, Clara began to notice that the world beyond her ranch was moving in fast forward while her life remained anchored in slow motion. Friends from school, married, had children, and built busy lives. She would hear stories of romantic trips, family gatherings, and shared adventures, and sometimes a pang of longing would strike her heart. She didn't resent anyone for their happiness, but she couldn't help feeling a quiet ache for a life she had never known. A life where someone might wake up beside her, share in the mundane joys, and stand by her through storms both literal and metaphorical. One cold autumn evening, after a long day of repairing fences and checking on the cattle, Clara sat on her porch wrapped in a thick blanket. The wind whistled through the trees, and the sky above glowed with the soft pink and orange of sunset. She held a cup of tea, letting the warmth seep into her hands, and stared at the horizon. In that quiet moment, she allowed herself to admit a truth she had buried deep inside. She wanted someone who understood her, who didn't see her just as a rancher, but as a woman with dreams, fears, and a heart full of hope. It was a simple wish, but one she hadn't dared to voice. Clara didn't know if that person existed, or if they ever would. She didn't even know if she could recognize them if they did. But as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the world in hues of gold and purple, she felt a strange sense of anticipation. Maybe, just maybe, life had something unexpected in store for her. Maybe the quiet, lonely days were leading up to a moment she could never have imagined. Until that moment arrived, Clara Jensen would continue tending to her ranch, nurturing her animals and embracing the solitude she had known all her life. But deep inside, a small seed of hope had been planted. A hope that the loneliness she had carried for so long might one day be replaced by the warmth of connection, laughter, and love. And though she couldn't see it yet, that hope would soon take root in a way she could never have expected. One crisp morning, Clara was up before the sun. As usual, the air smelled of wet grass and earth, and a faint mist hovered above the pastures. She fed the cows, checked the fences, and made her way to the barn, humming softly to herself. It was the same routine she had followed for years, and yet that morning something felt slightly different. Perhaps it was the change in the wind, or the quiet stillness of the fields, but Clara felt a sense of anticipation she couldn't explain. She shook her head and laughed softly at herself. Just the coffee talking, she muttered, pouring herself a warm cup before stepping outside to enjoy the sunrise. As she walked toward the barn, she noticed a car driving slowly along the dirt road that cut across her property. It wasn't unusual to see visitors occasionally. Sometimes neighbors passed by, or tourists looking for a scenic view. But there was something unusual about this car. It was shiny, almost new, and the man inside seemed a little out of place. Clara squinted, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and waved. The car slowed, and the man got out. He was tall, with short brown hair and a warm smile, wearing a neatly pressed shirt and sturdy jeans. He carried a camera in one hand and a notebook in the other. "Hi there," he said, approaching her with a friendly nod.
I'm Lucas. I'm visiting the area to learn about ranch life for a book I'm writing.
"I hope I'm not intruding." Clara wiped her hands on her apron, feeling a mixture of curiosity and caution.
Well, you're welcome to look around, I guess. I'm Clara Jensen.
She held out a hand, which he shook firmly. There was a confidence in him that didn't feel overwhelming, but there was also something about the way he looked at her, like he was genuinely interested in what she had to say. Lucas spent the morning watching Clara work. He asked questions about the ranch, the animals, and the challenges she faced daily. Clara found herself talking more than usual. She explained how she managed the fences, how she tracked the health of her cattle, and even the way she predicted storms by watching the sky and the behavior of the animals. Lucas listened attentively, jotting down notes and occasionally snapping pictures. At first, Clara thought of him as just a polite visitor, but there was a spark in their interaction, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She found herself laughing at his jokes, noticing the kindness in his eyes and feeling a warmth that made the loneliness she carried feel lighter, if only for a little while. By the time lunch came around, Clara realized she didn't want him to leave yet. Over sandwiches at the small kitchen table, Lucas continued to ask questions, but now the conversation drifted toward lighter topics. He spoke of city life, of his childhood, and of how he had always been fascinated by people who lived close to the land. Clara shared small stories from her own life. The first time she had ridden a horse alone, the time she had helped deliver a calf, the stubborn old dog that had been her companion for years. When Lucas got up to leave that afternoon, Clara felt a strange hesitation. She hadn't realized how much she had enjoyed his company until that moment. She walked him to the gate, watching him carefully, and then, almost without thinking, she whispered something that surprised even herself. "Can you pretend to be my husband?" Lucas froze. The words hung in the air between them like a delicate, fragile thread. He blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and curiosity. Clara's cheeks turned slightly pink. I mean, it's silly, I know, but, well, I've never had anyone, and sometimes it would be nice if someone could just pretend. Just for a little while. She looked down at her boots, embarrassed, feeling like she had just revealed a secret she had kept locked inside for years. Lucas didn't respond immediately. He studied her face, noticing the honesty in her eyes, the slight tremble of her hands, and the quiet vulnerability she rarely showed anyone. He realized that this wasn't a joke or a fleeting thought. This was a moment of real courage from a woman who had spent most of her life alone. He felt a strange mixture of admiration, curiosity, and an almost protective instinct. "Clara," he said finally, with a gentle smile, I think I understand. I can do it if you want. But you should know, I don't really know how to pretend to be a husband." Clara laughed softly, relieved and slightly embarrassed at the same time. "I don't either," she admitted.
I'm not asking for a perfect performance. I just,
Want to feel what it's like, even if it's just for a little while. And so, an unusual arrangement began. Lucas returned the next day, and then the day after, slowly learning the rhythm of life on the ranch. At first, the pretend husband role was awkward. Clara found herself directing him like a teacher, showing him where the tools were, explaining how to feed the animals, and even how to handle the stubborn cows that sometimes resisted. Lucas stumbled at first, dropping buckets and tripping over fences, but Clara found herself laughing instead of getting frustrated. His mistakes were human, endearing even, and they made her realize how lonely she had been for companionship that didn't revolve around work alone. Over the weeks, Lucas became a familiar presence on the ranch. He helped Clara with chores, and they spent evenings cooking together in the small kitchen. They shared stories, jokes, and quiet moments on the porch, watching the sunset over the plains. It wasn't real marriage, but it was something close to connection, something Clara had longed for without realizing it. She began to notice small changes in herself. She smiled more, laughed more, and even allowed herself to hope that maybe she wasn't destined to be alone forever. One afternoon, after a long morning of repairing fences, Lucas suggested they take a break and walk to the small creek that ran along the edge of the property. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the trees cast gentle shadows on the ground. Clara felt the breeze on her face and realized how much she had missed having someone to share simple moments with. They didn't speak much as they walked. The silence was comfortable, filled only with the sounds of birds and flowing water. For the first time in years, Clara felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with human connection. Despite the pretend nature of their arrangement, both Clara and Lucas began to understand each other in ways that went beyond acting. Clara shared her fears, her dreams, and even the small insecurities she had carried since childhood. Lucas listened, offering comfort and support without judgment. He shared his own struggles, the loneliness he sometimes felt in the city, and the moments when he wished life were slower, simpler, and more meaningful. Together they found an understanding that felt genuine, even if it existed under the guise of make-believe. But as the days passed, Clara couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. She worried that her feelings were growing stronger than intended, that she might begin to hope for something real that Lucas couldn't offer. And yet, every time she saw his smile, felt the warmth of his hand on hers while carrying feed buckets, or heard his laughter echo across the barn, she couldn't stop herself from wanting more. Then came a day that tested the strength of their unusual bond. A sudden storm swept across the plains, heavy rain drenching the fields and strong winds threatening the fences and livestock. Clara and Lucas worked side by side, securing gates, moving animals to safer pastures, and checking each fence line for damage. The rain soaked them to the bone, but neither complained. There was a rhythm to their teamwork, a silent understanding that they were protecting not just the ranch, but each other. By the time the storm passed, Clara realized that Lucas's presence had become essential, not just for help with chores, but for emotional support. That evening, sitting by the fire in the small living room, Clara felt a quiet gratitude she hadn't experienced in years. The warmth of the fire, the scent of wet earth lingering on their clothes, and the sense of shared accomplishment filled her with a contentment that felt almost new. She glanced at Lucas, who was scribbling notes for his book, and realized that the line between pretend and real was starting to blur. Clara didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if Lucas would continue to stay or if this arrangement would end as abruptly as it had begun. But in that moment, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of connection, the chance that life could surprise her even after years of solitude. And for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. a fragile, glowing hope that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be alone anymore. As the days turned into weeks, Clara and Lucas settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and unfamiliar. The pretend husband arrangement had begun as a simple idea, a small act of companionship to ease the loneliness Clara had carried for years. But now it had become something more complicated. They worked side by side on the ranch, sharing meals, laughter, and quiet moments, all while slowly discovering the layers of each other's personalities. Clara had begun to notice things about Lucas that she hadn't expected. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about learning something new, the gentle patience he showed when handling animals, and the small gestures that revealed a thoughtfulness she had rarely experienced. Lucas, in turn, found himself drawn to Clara in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her independence was inspiring, but her moments of vulnerability tugged at him in a way he couldn't ignore. He admired her strength, her resilience, and the way she carried the weight of the ranch on her shoulders without complaint. And yet, beneath that strength, he saw softness, a longing for connection that mirrored his own hidden loneliness. Their bond, built on the pretense of a shared life, was becoming more real with every shared sunrise and every evening spent under the vast Montana sky. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence near the northern pasture, Clara paused to catch her breath. The sun was high and the air was warm, filled with the scent of hay and the distant sound of cattle. Lucas was hammering a post into place, his movements deliberate and steady, and Clara couldn't help but watch him. There was something comforting about his presence, a feeling that made the hard work feel lighter. "You're getting the hang of this," Clara said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I think you might be better at fence repair than some of the local ranchers," Lucas laughed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'll take that as a compliment, though I have to admit, it's easier with a good teacher." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She didn't want to admit it, but moments like these were becoming the highlight of her days. She was discovering a strange kind of joy in sharing her world, her routines, and even her small frustrations with someone who cared enough to be there. Despite the growing closeness, there were moments of awkwardness. Pretending to be married wasn't easy, and sometimes their conversations slipped into uncomfortable territory. Lucas would ask questions about her past relationships, or the lack thereof, and Clara would feel a mix of embarrassment and sadness. She hated feeling vulnerable, yet she couldn't hide the truth from him. Each time she admitted a piece of her past, she felt both exposed and relieved, and each time Lucas responded with kindness, never judgment, only understanding. Their relationship began to extend beyond the ranch. Lucas would accompany Clara to town on errands, helping her carry supplies or keeping her company during visits to the local market. People in town started to notice the pair, curious about their connection. Some whispered questions, others offered friendly smiles, but Clara didn't care. For the first time, she felt that she could be herself in public without fear of judgment. Lucas's presence made the outside world feel less intimidating, and she realized that having someone by her side made even the smallest tasks easier and more enjoyable. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara and Lucas sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was a canvas of pink and orange, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine and soil. Clara leaned back in her chair, feeling a rare sense of peace. "I never thought I'd enjoy having someone around this much," she admitted quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Lucas looked at her, his expression soft. "I didn't expect it either. I thought this would be an interesting experience for my book, but it's more than that. Being here with you, it feels real, even if we're pretending." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She knew what he meant, and a wave of emotion swept over her. For so long she had lived in a world of routine and solitude, believing that companionship was something reserved for others. Now, sitting here with Lucas, she realized that her life could be different, fuller, warmer, and filled with unexpected moments of joy. The next few weeks brought both challenges and growth. A neighboring ranch experienced a sudden illness among its cattle, and Clara and Lucas volunteered to help, offering their knowledge and labor. The experience was intense and exhausting, but it brought them closer together. Working side by side under pressure, they learned to trust each other implicitly, relying on instincts, communication, and mutual respect. The shared experience revealed new depths to their bond, showing Clara that trust and connection could grow even in the most practical and challenging circumstances. As they returned to Clara's ranch, exhausted but satisfied, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed in her life in such a short time. Lucas had become more than just a pretend husband. He was a companion, a confidant, and a source of support she hadn't known she needed. She realized that the lines between reality and pretense were blurring, and with that realization came both excitement and fear. She didn't want to admit how deeply she was beginning to care, worried that her feelings might not be reciprocated in the same way. One rainy afternoon, the weather forced them to stay inside. The sound of raindrops tapping against the windows created a rhythmic comfort, and they spent hours talking in the living room, sharing stories from their pasts, their hopes, and even their fears. Clara spoke of her childhood on the ranch, the loss of her father, and the moments when she had doubted whether anyone would ever truly care for her. Lucas listened patiently, offering gentle words of encouragement and understanding. He shared stories of his own loneliness in the city, of the moments he had felt invisible, and of the longing for a simpler life, one where people genuinely cared for each other. That evening, as they prepared a simple dinner together, Clara felt a surge of gratitude. The pretend arrangement had become something meaningful, something that neither of them had expected. She realized that love, or at least the beginnings of it, could grow in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes courage and openness were all it took to create a connection. Despite their growing closeness, Clara still held back in subtle ways. She was cautious, afraid of being hurt or disappointed. And yet every small touch, every shared laugh, and every moment of understanding chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. Lucas sensed this, and he too was careful, allowing their relationship to develop naturally without pressure or expectation. One sunny morning, Clara and Lucas were tending to the cattle when a young calf became stuck near a fence. Clara immediately rushed to help, but the situation required two people to carefully maneuver the animal without causing injury. Lucas moved with ease, following her instructions and anticipating her actions. The calf was freed safely, and as they stood back, breathing heavily and laughing at the stress of the situation, Clara felt a thrill of joy. She realized that moments like these, moments of shared struggle, trust, and teamwork, were the building blocks of real connection. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple, Clara and Lucas were sitting on the porch once again, tired but content. They didn't speak much, allowing the quiet to envelop them. And yet, in that silence, there was a powerful understanding. Both knew that their relationship, though started as a simple act of pretense, had evolved into something far more significant. They had discovered companionship, trust, and a growing affection that neither could ignore. The days continued in this delicate balance of work, laughter, and quiet moments, but Clara felt an undercurrent of anticipation. Something was changing, something that neither of them could fully articulate yet. She found herself noticing Lucas in ways she hadn't before. The way he smiled when he was proud, the thoughtful way he approached challenges, and the kindness in his eyes. And she realized with both excitement and fear that her heart was no longer entirely her own. One evening, as they watched the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky, Clara whispered softly, almost to herself, "Maybe life has more to offer than I ever imagined." Lucas looked at her, understanding the depth of her words without needing explanation. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his own, and held it with a quiet assurance that spoke louder than any declaration. In that simple gesture, Clara felt a promise of trust, connection, and the possibility that something real was beginning to grow between them. And though neither of them knew exactly what the future held, both felt the unspoken truth that their bond, born from a simple act of courage and vulnerability, was becoming something neither could deny and something neither wanted to let go of. The morning began quietly, with mist lingering over the pastures and the faint crow of roosters in the distance. Clara was up early, as usual, checking on the cattle and making sure everything was in order. Lucas was already outside, helping her move, feed, and check fences. There was a calmness in the air, the kind that made Clara think it might be just another ordinary day. But in the back of her mind, a small unease lingered. The sky seemed heavier, the clouds thicker than usual, as if warning of what was to come. By late morning, the wind began to pick up, carrying a chill that made Clara pull her jacket tighter. The clouds overhead darkened quickly, turning the bright sky into a canvas of gray. The animals grew restless, lowing in concern, and Clara's heart began to race. She had learned to read the signs of an approaching storm over the years: the behavior of the cattle, the sudden change in temperature, and the scent of rain in the air. Something was coming, and she knew it could be dangerous. "Lucas," she said, her voice calm but firm, "we need to get the cattle to the lower pasture. The fences there are stronger, and it's safer if they're together." Lucas nodded immediately, his expression serious.
Got it.
Let's move quickly. Together they worked with precision, moving the herd carefully but efficiently.
Clara gave instructions while Lucas anticipated her needs, carrying buckets, opening gates, and calming the animals when panic threatened to set in. The storm was approaching faster than expected, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. The wind howled across the plains, bending the trees and whipping the loose hay into the air. Clara shouted over the roar, directing the cattle, while Lucas stayed close, offering steady support and quick thinking. As the storm worsened, a section of fencing collapsed near the northern pasture. Clara's heart sank. Without a fence, the cattle could scatter and be injured. She ran to assess the damage, and Lucas followed immediately, helping her lift and secure the broken boards. The wind tore at their jackets, and the rain soaked them through, but neither hesitated. They worked side by side, moving quickly, coordinating their efforts with a familiarity that only came from trust and experience. The storm grew more intense, with lightning flashing across the sky and thunder rolling over the hills. Clara felt a surge of fear but pushed it aside, focusing entirely on the task at hand. Lucas, too, showed no sign of hesitation. He moved with care, lifting heavy boards and bracing fences against the wind, all while keeping a watchful eye on the animals. Clara realized in that moment that his presence was more than helpful. It was a comfort. In the middle of chaos, she wasn't alone. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. Clara and Lucas were drenched, exhausted, and covered in mud, but they refused to give up. They checked every fence line, calmed every distressed animal, and made sure no calf or horse was left vulnerable. Every so often, they would exchange a glance, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come together. The pretend husband arrangement, which had started as a simple act of companionship, now felt real. They relied on each other in ways neither had anticipated, and that reliance was deepening a bond neither could ignore. At one point, A young calf became separated from the herd, trapped against a fence weakened by the storm. Clara rushed to it, but the mud made footing difficult, and the wind nearly knocked her off balance. Lucas grabbed her arm, steadying her, and together they carefully freed the calf. As they stepped back, breathing heavily and laughing despite the chaos, Clara felt a rush of gratitude. In that moment, she realized that Lucas's presence had become essential, not just for work, but for her sense of safety and well-being. The storm finally began to subside late in the afternoon. The rain lessened to a drizzle, and the wind gradually died down. Clara and Lucas surveyed the ranch, noting the damage: a few fences down, patches of crops flattened, and some trees uprooted. The cattle were all accounted for, thankfully, and none had been seriously injured. Despite the destruction, there was a sense of relief, a quiet satisfaction in knowing they had survived the storm together. Exhausted but determined, they began the cleanup. Clara worked tirelessly, lifting debris, repairing fences, and making sure the animals were safe. Lucas stayed by her side, helping wherever needed, sometimes carrying heavy loads, sometimes simply offering encouragement. The physical labor was grueling, but Clara found comfort in his presence. She realized that, through this shared struggle, they had built something stronger than companionship. They had built trust, respect, and a connection that went beyond words. That evening, after the sun had set and the ranch was finally secure, Clara and Lucas sat by the fire in the small living room. Their clothes were still damp, and their hair stuck to their faces, but they didn't care. They were tired in a way that felt good, satisfied by the knowledge that they had faced the storm together and emerged stronger. "I don't know what I would have done without you today," Clara said quietly, her voice tinged with emotion. Lucas reached across the small table, taking her hand in his. "We make a good team," he said softly. "Not just because of work, but because we trust each other. And trust, that's more important than anything else." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had spent so many years believing that no one could understand her, that no one could see her for who she truly was. But now, sitting here with Lucas, she realized that she had been wrong. Someone could care. Someone could understand, and that realization, after years of solitude, felt almost miraculous. Over the next few days, Clara and Lucas continued the repair work, rebuilding fences, clearing fallen trees, and ensuring the animals were safe and comfortable. The ranch had suffered, but it was alive and thriving once more, a testament to their hard work and determination. And through it all, their bond continued to grow. They laughed together, shared meals, and even found moments of quiet joy in the midst of labor. Each small success, each shared challenge, deepened their connection and strengthened the trust that had begun during the early days of the pretend husband arrangement.
One morning, as Clara checked the pasture, she noticed Lucas watching her from the porch.
He had a thoughtful expression on his face, and for a moment, Clara wondered what he was thinking. She approached him cautiously, curious but also slightly nervous. "I've been thinking," Lucas said, his voice gentle, "about the storm, about everything we've done together. And I realize this isn't pretend anymore, is it?" Clara's heart skipped a beat. She looked down, unsure how to respond. She had felt it herself. The bond that had grown between them was real, and the pretense of their arrangement was fading. But admitting it aloud made her vulnerable, exposed in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. I think you're right," she said finally, meeting his gaze. "It started as pretend, but now it feels real." Lucas smiled, a warmth in his eyes that made Clara's chest ache. "I feel the same. I didn't expect this, but I can't ignore it. I care about you, Clara, more than I thought I could. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, not from sadness, but from relief, joy, and a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so long alone, believing that no one would ever see her, that no one would ever care. And now, in the aftermath of the storm, she realized that life had surprised her in the most beautiful way. As the days passed, Clara and Lucas began to explore the new depth of their relationship. They shared quiet mornings on the porch, long walks across the pastures, and evenings by the fire, talking, laughing, and sometimes simply sitting in silence, content in each other's company. The challenges of the ranch no longer felt overwhelming because they faced them together. And through every hardship, every storm, and every triumph, Clara discovered a truth she had long forgotten: that love, trust, and companionship could grow in the most unexpected places, even amidst mud, rain, and exhaustion. By the time the first hints of spring appeared on the ranch, Clara knew that the bond she and Lucas had formed was no longer pretend. It was real, tested by storms both literal and emotional, and strengthened by shared experience, trust, and growing affection. And though the future remained uncertain, she felt a confidence she had never known, a confidence that they could face whatever came next, together. Spring had fully arrived on the ranch, painting the fields in shades of green and gold. The cattle grazed peacefully, and the air smelled of fresh grass and wild flowers. The sun rose earlier now, casting warmth over the land that Clara had cared for her entire life. After the storm they had faced together, everything felt different, brighter, lighter, and more hopeful. Even the old barn seemed to stand taller, more secure, as if it knew that the struggles had been overcome. Clara had spent the morning feeding the animals, her hands busy but her mind at ease. Lucas was nearby, mending a broken fence, his focus steady but his eyes occasionally drifting toward her. They had grown used to the rhythm of working together, each understanding the other without needing to speak. Yet, despite the familiarity, there was an undercurrent of excitement that Clara couldn't ignore, the sense that life was opening a new chapter, one she had never dared to imagine. After lunch, they took a break and sat on the porch enjoying the warmth of the sun. Clara held a cup of tea, while Lucas leaned back in his chair, his notebook forgotten on the table. There was a comfortable silence between them, broken only by the distant lowing of the cattle and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Clara watched him quietly and realized how much he had become a part of her life. It wasn't just that he helped with the ranch. He had become her companion, her confidant, and someone she could trust completely. "I've been thinking," Clara said softly, her voice almost hesitant, "about how much has changed these past few months." Lucas turned to her, his eyes warm and attentive. "I've been thinking about that too. It's incredible how everything feels different now." Clara smiled, a little shyly. "It started as pretend. I never imagined it could become real. And now, I don't want it to be pretend anymore." Lucas reached out and took her hand gently, holding it in both of his. "Neither do I," he said. "I never thought I could feel this way, but I do. I care about you, Clara, not as a friend, not as someone I'm helping with a story, but as someone I want in my life." Clara's chest tightened with emotion. She had spent years believing she was meant to be alone, that no one could understand her, and yet here he was, someone who not only understood, but cared deeply. The years of solitude and hard work on the ranch had taught her resilience, patience, and strength, but now she realized that love could also give her courage. From that moment, their relationship transformed. The boundaries of pretend and reality disappeared completely. Clara and Lucas continued to work together on the ranch, but now there was a new energy, an easy laughter, stolen glances, and a sense of belonging that neither had expected. Even the neighbors began to notice the change. People in town would smile knowingly when they saw the two of them walking together, working side by side and sharing quiet moments on the porch. It was clear that something real had grown from the simple idea of pretending to be husband and wife. One afternoon, as they repaired the fence along the northern pasture, Lucas paused and looked at Clara with a serious expression. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about how much you've taught me these past months. About patience, about hard work, and about caring in ways I didn't know were possible." Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. "I hope I haven't made it too hard for you." Lucas smiled. "Hard? Mm. Worth it?"
Absolutely every moment.
And Clara, "I think this is just the beginning. I want to be here with you, through every challenge, every sunrise, and every quiet evening. Not pretending. Real. Always." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. It wasn't just the words. It was the sincerity, the trust, and the unwavering support he had shown her. She realized that this was what she had longed for, what she had whispered for in the quiet of her kitchen on lonely nights. Someone to share her life with. Someone who could stand beside her through the storms, literal and emotional. The next few weeks were filled with both work and moments of quiet connection. They tended to the ranch, fixed fences, and cared for the animals, but they also allowed themselves to enjoy small joys together, walking through the fields at sunset, cooking simple meals side by side, and sharing stories under the vast Montana sky. The pretend act that had started months earlier had blossomed into genuine companionship and love. Clara realized that Lucas wasn't just a visitor in her life. He had become a part of her world, inseparable from the land she had tended for so long. One morning, as they fed the calves, Lucas stopped and looked at Clara with a playful grin. "You know, we've been pretending to be married for months now. Maybe it's time to stop pretending?" Clara raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a small smile. "Are you suggesting something?" Lucas laughed softly. "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm suggesting that we stop pretending and start really being together. Properly. No scripts, no acting." Clara felt her heart swell. "I'd like that," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "I've spent so long alone, and now I don't want to be alone anymore. Not if you're willing to stay." Lucas took her hand in his again, this time holding it firmly. "I'm staying, Clara, not because I have to, but because I want to. You've shown me a life I didn't know I could have. A life filled with connection, trust, and love. And I don't want to give that up." From that day forward, their bond deepened in ways neither had anticipated. They continued to care for the ranch, facing challenges together with teamwork and trust. But now there was also a sense of joy and partnership that had been missing for so long. Clara discovered that sharing her life didn't make her weaker. It made her stronger. She had learned to open her heart slowly, but now, with Lucas by her side, she realized that vulnerability could be a source of strength and happiness. The seasons changed, and the ranch flourished under their combined care. Spring turned to summer, and the fields glowed with golden sunlight. The cattle thrived, the fences stood strong, and the land seemed to pulse with life and abundance. Clara and Lucas celebrated small victories together, whether it was a healthy calf, a repaired barn, or simply a perfect evening on the porch. Each moment reinforced the love and trust that had grown between them, a love that had been tested and proven through both quiet days and violent storms. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara and Lucas sat on the porch with a blanket draped over their shoulders. The sky was a mix of pink and orange, and the air was warm and fragrant with the scent of wildflowers. Lucas leaned his head against Clara's shoulder, and she rested her hand on his. "You know," Lucas said quietly, "I never imagined that pretending could lead to this. I never imagined that I would find someone like you, someone who makes life brighter, fuller, and more meaningful." Clara smiled, her heart full. "I didn't imagine it either. I spent so long thinking I would be alone forever, that no one could understand me or want to be with me. And now everything is different. You've changed my life, Lucas. Not just because you're here, but because you care. Because you've shown me that love is possible." Lucas pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And you've changed mine. I've learned more about life, about patience, and about love from you than I ever thought I could. We've built something real together, Clara, not pretending anymore, but living it fully." In the days and weeks that followed, Clara and Lucas continued to nurture both the ranch and their relationship. They celebrated birthdays, shared meals with neighbors, and enjoyed quiet evenings under the stars. Their love became the foundation for everything, giving them strength, joy, and a sense of belonging that Clara had never known. The ranch, once a place of solitude and hard work, became a home filled with laughter, connection, and love. Clara realized that the loneliness she had carried for so many years was no longer a part of her life. She had taken a chance, whispered her desperate wish for companionship, and found not only a partner but a true love that could withstand storms, both literal and emotional. And as the sun set over the wide Montana plains, casting a golden glow over the land she had loved all her life, Clara knew, with a certainty she had never felt before, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, beside Lucas, in a life filled with love, trust, and the promise of countless bright tomorrows. The days after the storm felt different on the ranch. The air was clearer, the sky brighter, and the land seemed to breathe with a sense of relief. Clara moved through her morning routines with a lighter step. The cattle were healthy, the fences repaired, and the barns standing strong. Yet, more than the physical changes, something in her heart felt renewed. She had faced a challenge she had never faced before, side by side with Lucas, and it had shown her what she was truly capable of. But the most important realization wasn't about strength or resilience, it was about companionship. Clara found herself watching Lucas more often these days. She noticed the way he laughed at small things, the careful attention he gave to the animals, and the quiet way he moved around the ranch, never in a rush but always thoughtful. There was a steadiness about him that she had never known in anyone else. And though they had started with a pretend arrangement, she realized that her feelings for him had grown beyond pretense. Every glance, every shared task, every evening spent on the porch had built a bond she could no longer ignore. Lucas, for his part, seemed to sense the change in Clara. He began leaving little notes for her in the kitchen, small gestures that made her smile during the busiest parts of the day. Sometimes he would bring her fresh coffee before sunrise, or quietly take over a chore she was struggling with. He didn't announce his affection loudly, but it was there in every action, every thoughtful movement. Clara had spent so many years alone, believing that no one could understand her life, that no one could see her for who she truly was. And now here was someone who not only saw her, but cared deeply, without judgment, without expectation. One afternoon, while checking the fence line along the eastern pasture, Clara and Lucas paused to rest under a large oak tree. The wind moved gently through the branches, and the sunlight dappled the ground in gold. For a moment, they just sat there, side by side, letting the quiet of the land wash over them. Clara sipped water from her bottle and smiled at the simplicity of the moment. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas turned to her, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Every day," he said. "I never expected any of this. I thought I was just visiting, helping with the ranch for a story, and maybe I."
Learning something. But I didn't expect to find someone like you, Clara.
Someone who's strong, kind, and so full of life. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. She had long thought she would never find someone who understood her world. The early mornings, the long hours, the quiet struggles, and the endless responsibilities of running a ranch. Yet here was Lucas, appreciating not just her work, but her heart, her humor, her stubbornness, and her courage. "I didn't expect this either," she admitted. "I thought my life was complete on its own, but now it feels like something was missing, and I think I found it." Lucas reached over and took her hand, holding it gently. "Clara," he said, his voice steady and warm, "I want to be here with you. Not as a visitor, not as someone pretending, but as someone who truly wants to share this life with you. Every day, every sunrise, every storm, and every quiet evening, I want to be here, fully, if you'll have me." Clara's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming joy of finally hearing the words she had longed to hear. She squeezed his hand, her heart racing. "I want that too," she said. "I've spent so long alone, thinking I could manage on my own, but I don't want to be alone anymore."
Not if it means losing you. From that moment, the boundaries of pretend and reality disappeared completely.
Clara and Lucas began building a life together that was as real as the land they worked on. They continued their routines on the ranch, feeding cattle, repairing fences, and tending to crops. But now there was a new energy. Laughter, shared glances, quiet conversations, and small acts of affection that made every task lighter. Even the simplest chore became enjoyable because they were together. Neighbors began to notice the change in Clara. People who had once assumed she would remain solitary smiled knowingly when they saw her walking beside Lucas, hand in hand, or sitting together on the porch at sunset. Some commented on how happy she seemed, but Clara didn't care about gossip or assumptions. She knew the truth. She had found someone who loved her for who she was, someone who shared her world and understood her heart. One day, Lucas suggested they take a break and walk to the small creek at the edge of the property. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and wildflowers grew along the banks. They walked slowly, side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, each moment comfortable and peaceful. At one point, Lucas stopped and turned to Clara. "You know," he said, "we've been pretending to be married for months. And now that I think about it, I don't want to pretend anymore. I want this to be real. I want you to know that I mean it. Every day, every moment. I want to be your partner, Clara. Truly." Clara laughed softly, a mix of joy and disbelief. "I thought you'd never say it," she replied. "I wanted the same thing for so long, but I was scared. I didn't know if I could let someone in. And now, here you are." They sat together on a fallen log, watching the water ripple over the stones. For a long time, neither spoke, simply enjoying the quiet and the comfort of each other's presence. It was a peacefulness Clara had never known, a sense that she had finally found her place in the world, not just on the ranch, but beside someone who truly cared. The following weeks were filled with small celebrations and quiet joys. Clara and Lucas worked together on projects around the ranch, fixing old structures, planting new crops, and caring for the animals. They shared evening meals under the wide Montana sky, talking about dreams, memories, and hopes for the future. Each day brought them closer together, deepening a bond that had begun in pretense but now blossomed into something real, enduring, and beautiful. Clara discovered that love didn't make her weaker. It made her stronger. She could face challenges, handle responsibilities, and navigate the demands of the ranch with renewed energy and courage. And Lucas discovered that companionship on a ranch was more than physical help. It was emotional support, shared understanding, and trust that only deepened over time. Together, they created a partnership that was balanced, respectful, and full of warmth. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of pink and orange, they sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The air smelled of wildflowers and freshly tilled soil, and the sound of the cattle in the distance was soothing. Lucas leaned his head against Clara's shoulder, and she rested her hand on his. "I never thought pretending could lead to this," Lucas said quietly. "I didn't know I could feel so connected to someone, so understood." Clara smiled, her heart full. "Neither did I. I spent so many years believing I would always be alone. And now I see that life can surprise you, sometimes in ways you never expect." They sat together in silence for a while, letting the beauty of the moment sink in. The ranch, once a place of solitude and hard work, had become a home filled with laughter, love, and companionship. Clara realized that the years of loneliness had not been wasted. They had prepared her to truly appreciate the bond she now shared with Lucas. As the seasons continued to change, Clara and Lucas built a life together that was both simple and rich with meaning. They faced challenges, celebrated successes, and shared countless quiet moments under the vast Montana sky. Their love, once born of pretense, had grown into a reality more beautiful than either could have imagined. Clara often thought back to the night she had whispered her desperate request, "Can you pretend to be my husband?" She had spoken those words in hope and fear, never imagining that they would lead to real love. And yet, here she was, living a life she had once only dreamed of. A life filled with trust, joy, and the kind of companionship that made every sunrise brighter. Lucas squeezed her hand gently, and Clara knew without a doubt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not alone, not pretending, but together building a future full of love, laughter, and the promise of countless bright tomorrows on the ranch they both cherished. And as the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the land, Clara leaned her head against Lucas's shoulder and whispered softly, "Thank you for staying." Lucas smiled, pressing his lips to her hair. "Thank you for trusting me." "Always."